CASAT Podcast Network.
Welcome to Season 2 of CASAT Conversations. I am your host, Heather Haslam. This season, we will explore the timely and complex topic of resilience for healthcare providers. Within each conversation, you will hear from experts, clinicians, and providers who will explore and share the latest research, best practices, and applications for how to be resilient. Please enjoy today's conversation. Welcome to today's episode of CASAT Conversations. We are so excited to welcome Dr. James Gordon to the show today. Dr. Gordon is a Harvard-educated psychiatrist, former researcher at the National Institute of Mental Health, founder and executive director of the nonprofit Center for Mind-Body Medicine in Washington, D.C. He is a clinical professor at Georgetown Medical School and was chairman under Presidents Clinton and George W. Bush of the White House Commission on Complementary Alternative Medicine Policy. He has written for the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Atlantic, as well as numerous professional journals, and has been featured on 60 Minutes, The Today Show, Good Morning America, and NPR. Dr. Gordon's latest book, Transforming Trauma, The Path to Hope and Healing, helps us understand that trauma will soon come to us all. Welcome, Dr. Gordon. We are delighted to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much, Heather. And of course, we're recording during a time when we're watching what's happening in Afghanistan and Haiti, and here in Washington, D.C., the unfolding uncertainty and trauma of political conflict and concern about COVID-19. So indeed, trauma, although it comes to everyone in any case, now is coming to pretty much all of us all at once. Mm-hmm. So the topic becomes, I think, even more important now.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that in preparing for today's interview, really reflecting on, I've been following your work for the last couple of years, and it seems like there's an intensity in the world over the last couple of years and how important the work that you've done is today.
There is, and I think we're all experiencing it. I mean, there are very few people I know who, during the last time of COVID, have not become a little more anxious, a little more easily aggravated, a little more trouble sleeping or concentrating. So these are all symptoms of traumatic stress that are coming to us now, and it's important that we recognize where it's coming from. Doesn't mean we have a disease or we're sick. It means this is the way we're responding to a situation that is traumatic. And trauma is simply a Greek word that means injury, that injures our mind, our body, and our spirit.
Yeah, and when you describe it that way, it's really part of the human experience is trauma.
Yeah, that's that's the point I make at the beginning of Transforming Trauma, is that trauma comes not just in these particular troubled times, but if it doesn't come early in life because we're don't have money or live in a violent neighborhood or a violent country, or because we have a congenital illness or childhood illness, it may well come in young adulthood or midlife when many of us have suffered significant losses of relationships, of parents or grandparents, or we're dealing with major disappointments at work or divorce. Well over half of all American marriages end in divorce, and I've yet to see a non-traumatic divorce. And if it doesn't happen then, surely as we grow old and become frail and deal with inevitable losses and our own upcoming death, all of those are traumatic. So it's really important that we understand that trauma, both the trauma is a part of life, and that there are ways that we can develop and learn for ourselves to move through and beyond it.
Mm-hmm. And as you know, our audience for this podcast really is healthcare professionals. And so can you speak to some of the trauma that's experienced within the field that you've seen in your work?
Well, yes. And I think the thing to begin with is this is an extraordinary situation these last couple of years with COVID-19, where the trauma for frontline healthcare professionals, the level has gone way up, whether we're working with physical illness or psychological issues or working with families or consulting with schools. We come in as healthcare professionals for the most part when people are going through a difficult time. And so staying with those people, being able to be present with them, to relax with them, to really tune into what's going on with them while we are paying attention to the trauma that they're telling us about, it is challenging. And because we tend to try to protect ourselves too, to sort of, no, it's a little too much. And that's one of the things one of the great problems that people have with healthcare professionals, as I'm sure you know, one of the reasons they look for alternative or other than conventional therapies, because they feel their health professional is not really listening to us and not tuning into who we are. So this is a vital part of our work, is to be able to relax with people when they're going through difficult times, when the perhaps life-threatening crises that they're experiencing are causing anxiety in us or causing, understandable concern. We need to have that kind of compassionate presence and yet not be swallowed up by the difficulties that other people are bringing to us. So we all need to learn to deal with the trauma that people bring to us and with our own trauma, because we're all human. We're all going through our own lives, and the whole point of the approach to trauma that I describe in Transforming Trauma, and that we work with at the Center for Mind-Body Medicine, is to help health professionals come into that state of balance, physiological and psychological balance, relaxed moment-to-moment awareness, which is healthy for them, helps them or us deal with our trauma, and at the same time allows us to do our best possible job with the people who are coming for help. So trauma healing for us is critical to us as people and as professionals, and it's also of critical importance to the people whom we're trying to serve, whether we're psychotherapists or physicians or nurses or counselors of any kind, which is one of the reasons why meditation is so a part of the work that I do, that we do at the Center for Mind-Body Medicine.
I love the term compassionate presence as a way to honor the impact that a clinician has on how they show up, and then the ripple effect that has on their patients and their clients.
Yeah, for me, and this is important, I want to tell everybody who's listening to us that this is especially important right at the beginning of when we're seeing people. That I know in my life, when I've been going through a hard time and I reach out to somebody and they have that compassionate presence, what a difference it makes to me, and how much I can feel myself breathing a little more easily even as I talk about it. How much that provides the kind of fertile soil for everything else that we're going to do. So what this means is that we need to be doing our best always to deal with our own stress and trauma so that we can have that compassionate presence with the people who are coming to us. So yes, it's what we need for our own help and healing, but it's what they need as well.
So I'm curious, really, how did you get into this work? You are a psychiatrist, you are an MD, and you come from this world. How did you get here?
Well, I went to medical school, and I experienced my first major trauma of which I was aware. I know I had some earlier in life, and I subsequently became aware of them. I got to medical school, and I thought, what is going on here? You mentioned I went to Harvard Medical School, and it felt like a super high-class trade school. I grew up in New York City, and we used to have these schools called machine and metal trades, where, high school kids could learn a trade. Harvard Medical School felt like a super fancy trade school, little on the rigid side, lots of rote learning, not so much time or place for imagination. And I started looking around and wondering, well, what am I doing here? All my classmates were generally extremely smart, and many of them had published scientific papers while they were still in college, and most of them seemed to have a very clear idea of where they were headed. And I wasn't, and they didn't mind all this rote learning. I'd gone, as an undergraduate, I'd studied English literature, I was a writer, or beginning to be a writer, and the imagination was crucially important to me, and so was connecting with other people. And here we were in medical school, sitting in lectures hour after hour after hour, and then going to labs and doing experiments, which were experiments that other researchers had already done that we were trying to replicate. And it just didn't feel right to me. So my own discomfort, my own distress at feeling out of place began to tune me in much more clearly and closely to other people's distress. To my patients when I began in second year to see some patients, and also to the struggle that Black people were having in the South and the civil rights movement. This is 1962, 63, and I recognized my little bit of trauma, my bit of alienation, made it much easier for me to appreciate and want to do something about and with people who were traumatized, whether it was by racism and discrimination or by the difficulty of dealing with an illness in a hospital. So that's really how I started. And then that was good. I mean, that was my trauma. Mm-hmm. It was painful. I'm not, saying that, I'm not saying people should go out and try to have it, but it did open me in certain ways that I was not up till that time. And then I got into therapy. And I think one of the things we sometimes forget, mental health professionals forget, is that the foundation of modern psychiatry and of all modern mental health, whether you're a clinical social worker, psychologist, counselor, it all goes back to the late 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, when two things happened. The most important of which was one guy, happened to be Sigmund Freud, started looking inside and connecting what was going on in his own mind and what had happened to him when he was young with what was going on now in his life. And he began to do the same with his patients. And what he mandated for this field of psychoanalysis that he created is that anybody who wanted to work with other people had to have this process of introspection. So I went into, and that's what, so many psychiatric residents, for example, have never done this kind of work. And many counselors and psychologists, they've never, they learn a technique or some tools, which are fine, but they haven't done the work on themselves. And so I realized how important that was for me. And that, and then I became very interested, as I was in medical school, in the experience of other people. I mean, that seems like maybe a dumb thing to say. Of course, you're a doctor, you're supposed to be interested in other people. But I wasn't just interested in their diagnosis. I was interested in who is the person who has this diagnosis? Who's the person lying there suffering in the hospital bed or coming into my office as an outpatient and talking with me? And I began to realize as I opened myself to the connection with people that they had a far greater capacity to understand and help themselves than I was usually taught in medical school. And that this process of self-discovery is one that could yield great results for people, and I wanted to facilitate that process. And I wanted to create a relationship that was really, to repeat that word, that was really a relationship. It wasn't me up here and the patient down there. It was, we're in this together. Yes, I'm here to help you, but we're both human beings, and this is a human encounter that we're having. So that's where I started. And then in later years, and we can talk more about that, as I moved through my own psychotherapy as a patient and my own psychoanalysis, I realized that I wanted something more, that this was incredibly valuable. I learned a great deal. It benefited me. I made significant changes, I believe. I have to check with other people and see if they agree. But I wanted something more. And fortunately, the people I saw for psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, I chose them because not only were they skillful, they're very open-minded and very kind people. And all of those were important. My psychoanalyst in New York, I was lying on the couch and my mind was going here and there, and I was feeling so peaceful and a state I'd never entered before, quite like this. And I said, Ed, what's going on? And he said, he took a puff of his pipe, and he said, I believe that's what they call meditation. And I said, oh, okay. That's what it is. I've been reading about it. I want more of that. So because I recognized that meditation could help me achieve this relaxed moment-to-moment awareness and could help me understand and look at myself in ways that went beyond what I had learned in psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. So meditation, as I began to pursue that then opened the door to all of these other tools and techniques that I've learned to use over the last 50 years or so.
There's so many great nuggets in your path, and getting to hear about, the wisdom that you've accumulated through your own introspection and your own practices throughout. You talked about wanting more at some point, and so much of your work is mind-body medicine. And so I'm curious your path on coming from the mind, from psychiatry, and then moving into the body.
That's a great question. Well, first of all, in the question is the suggestion, which I believe is true, that psychiatry has pretty much abandoned the body, with the exception of prescribing drugs or electroconvulsive therapy, that they've lost touch with the body. And so to a significant degree have the mental health professions. So that often mental health professionals who come to our training say, oh my God, I don't know if showing people how to move their bodies and dance, if that's in my scope of practice. And I definitely can't touch anybody. I know that the state board's not going to like that. Such nonsense. It's madness. It's eliminating a part of life and eliminating parts of ourselves that can be so helpful in helping us to heal. So how did I start? Well, when I started meditating, I could feel a difference in my body. And then in 1907, and I got interested in Chinese medicine because I started reading material coming out of China. This is about 1971, 72, showing that acupuncture seemed to be working. They were doing scientific studies. And at that point, Western science was saying this is a delusion, literally. It works because, or maybe it's a placebo effect. It works because Chinese people believe in it. I thought, well, maybe that's true. And then I read a randomized controlled trial of a study of the use of acupuncture on oxen with laminitis, with inflammation of the hooves. And the oxen who were treated with acupuncture did so much better than the untreated ones. And I thought to myself, having met an ox or two, I don't think this is placebo effect. Something's going on here. Meanwhile, I'd also had the occasion in the 60s to eat macrobiotic food, sometimes regularly for a while. And I could see my mood changed. If I ate a cheeseburger and strawberry shortcake, or if I ate brown rice, veggies, and some fish, it was, after one, I was ready to go to sleep. After the other, my energy was all there. My mind was clear. So I was starting to get glimpses of how, in acupuncture, how the body and the mind and the emotions were completely interpenetrating one another, and also of the power of food to at least change mood. And I was reading some of the studies. They weren't great studies on the use of macrobiotic diet, but people with chronic illness really did seem to be doing better when they got off processed food, when they stopped eating sugar, when they started eating, more on the lines of rice and veggies and fish rather than lots of fatty, sugary foods. Now, so I was primed, and that what's become now an old saying that's become a new one as well: when the student is ready, the teacher arrived. So this is 1973, and a friend of mine called me up from London, and he started talking with me about treatment that he was having. Now, the phone call was important for two reasons. It was the first, this is 73, I never had a transatlantic call before. But even more interesting was my friend was deaf. So if he was in the same room with me and I was shouting at him, he could hear me. I had never talked with him on the phone. He'd always had to have somebody interpret. And I said, "Richard, what is going on?" And Richard said, "Well, I'm going to see this crazy Indian. And he's doing acupuncture every day, and I'm eating grapes and hot water only for 60 days. And I think my hearing is better." I said, "No shit, Richard. I've never talked with you on the phone. You're hearing me. Your hearing's much better."
That's
And he said, "Well, he's coming to the United States. Could you set up a workshop for him?" I was a researcher at the National Institute of Mental Health. I said, "Absolutely. Anybody who can do that, I want to meet him. I want to know what he knows." And so his name was Shyam Singha. I wrote about him. I don't think I wrote about him in this recent book, Transforming Trauma. I've written about him in a couple of other books. And he was a mad Indian. It was very strange to me. He was wearing Savile Row fancy suit, fancy necktie, hair, shoulder length black hair, had yellow eyes, bright yellow eyes, and he walked around like a big cat. And just spending an hour with him, I knew he knew so many things I didn't know about Chinese medicine, about herbalism, about foods, about different forms of meditation. So I became a student. And I was a student for close to 20 years. And I learned Chinese medicine from him. I learned Western naturopathic medicine. I learned osteopathic manipulation. He was an osteopath. He was a homeopath, a herbalist, a naturopath. And I learned many different meditation techniques. And many of those techniques had to do with the body. We have a mistaken idea in much of our modern world, that meditation, you simply sit quietly or you become a little more mindful. Those are beautiful tools and techniques, and we use them, and I teach them in Transforming Trauma. But some of the most powerful meditative techniques are active physical expressive meditations. And I know you've been in our training, so you've experienced some of those techniques. And what those techniques do, whether it's fast, deep breathing or shaking and dancing or whirling or jumping up and down, is they break up fixed patterns of tension and restriction in the body, which often come when we've been severely traumatized or we have chronic illness. They certainly are there in people who are struggling with addiction or alcoholism. And also, those techniques bring emotions to the surface. So sometimes you can sit and talk with people week after week after week and nothing comes out. Somebody will come to one of our groups or learn a technique in Transforming Trauma, and all of a sudden they're in touch with sadness. And then behind that may be anger or maybe joy. So these expressive techniques, which are importantly the oldest forms of meditation on the planet, these use the body. And so that's how I began. I had a hard time sitting still when I tried to do sitting meditation in 1970, 71, 70, all those times. I got antsy. Whereas I could do these active expressive meditations. I'm a physical person, and I could do those, and then I could come to a state of calm. Through intense activity, I could not only loosen up what was going on in my body and bring out emotions, I came to that state of relaxed moment-to-moment awareness after I finished the expressive meditation. So that's how, so with expressive meditations and also with observing the power of food. And I began to experiment back in 1973. If I eat this way, what happens? If I have an allergic reaction, what do I do? If I was allergic, for example, I had pollen allergies. And I hated taking antihistamines because I got sleepy. And I knew, because I was a doctor, I knew they weren't really good for digestion in the long run. So I said, Sham, how do I get rid of these allergies? Maybe this was 74, 75, or even 76 before I asked that kind of question. He said, take a cubic inch of locally grown honeycomb, squeeze out the honey, chew a cubic inch of locally grown honeycomb 3 times a day for 3 months. It's a kind of homeopathic treatment for the allergies. I did it. And knock wood, I've never had allergies in DC since. Now, if I go somewhere else where the pollen is different, I may still have allergies. It's not that but here, now where I live, so I experience this every time, and I recommend this to people. Every time you have a relatively minor physical complaint, see what you can do. See what you can do with meditation. See what you can do with food. See what you can do with non-pharmacological treatments first before you go rushing to the drug. So I experimented on myself, and I still do.
I love that. And it sounds like really what you've helped to do is bring some of these ancient techniques and bring your research skills to them to support our highly evidence-based world so that these techniques can be more transferable and widely used.
Yeah, no, that's very important. And we've studied the approach that we use at the Center for Mind-Body Medicine. The one I teach in Transforming Trauma includes about 15 different self-care techniques. And the vast majority of them, everything from gratitude practice to forgiveness meditations to physical exercise to eating in a variety of different health-giving ways, there is lots of evidence for those techniques. And if you put them together, and I think this is important too for people who are listening to us, this is not about finding yet another magic bullet. Mm-hmm. This is about bringing together a comprehensive program in which each approach and each technique works in concert with the others. So in our training, the work that we do, the mind-body skills groups, where we teach these tools and techniques, we've done research on the use of these groups for 8 or 10 or 12 weeks with depressed young people, war traumatized veterans, kids who've lost family members, anxious medical students, stressed out health professionals. We've got almost 25 research papers showing the benefits of putting together this kind of program of self-care, and where possible, doing it as part of a group. Mm-hmm. Because this is also an important point, that you can do this. And I wrote Transforming Trauma so anybody can use this approach on their own, and yet it's easier and more interesting and more enjoyable if you can do it with a small group of other people.
Mm-hmm. I've been through the training, and the power of the group is really miraculous in having this deep connection with other people and hearing their stories and sharing just these experiences in a group is so meaningful to me. And so I really have seen that.
Good. I'm glad. And the groups are really important. One thing we can come back to later, we have online groups. So if people are interested in participating, and it's a sliding scale for those groups if people are financially challenged, the group, and these are different from other groups. Do you want to say a little bit about what you saw that was different? So in this group from other groups you've been in?
Yeah, I think what's different is, one, the facilitator is sharing their own experience and their own emotions in a very powerful way. And so to see a facilitator in that role, just being raw and human, really, I feel like helps the group to settle down and make it okay to bring your own stuff to the table and to the group. So I found it to be really a community of safety and a community of support to connect with on this deep human level.
Yeah, and everybody's there to learn for themselves, to make their own discoveries. We're not there to fix each other. We don't need fixing. We need to have an opportunity to share what we need to share, to learn what we need to learn, and to learn from other people without anybody giving a lecture or saying, Heather or Jim, you should do this or do the other. But just when I share my experience, you might get the idea and say, oh, that's interesting. Let me see how that works for me. So it's a group where each person is making discoveries. And as a leader, I assume you notice that we don't interpret, we don't analyze, and don't interrupt, except if somebody's going on at great length. Our job is to facilitate each person's growth. Plus, every group, you learn a new tool and technique. So there's a new kind of educational energy in every group.
Mm-hmm. And I think it also, for me, what stands out is it honors a person's inherent wisdom. That if we can take the time to do these practices, the answers are inside of us. Just sometimes we need to quiet all the noise to find those answers. And so to see someone, discover their own wisdom is a very beautiful thing.
Yeah, good. I'm so glad. Yeah, that's it. You got it.
Great. I pass. That's wonderful. I'm so glad you brought up the power of food and mood. This really, there's a growing field on nutritional psychiatry, but it sounds like you've really noticed this for the last 30, 40 years, the impact of food on mood. And yet in the behavioral health world, it seems like there's still a long way to go in understanding that connection.
Yes. The longest chapter in Transforming Trauma is on the trauma healing diet. That's because so little attention is paid, number one, that very few trauma healing programs pay much attention to the incredible therapeutic force of foods. Number two is it's a subject that deserves time and space. When we are traumatized or when we've been under chronic stress, our digestive tract is just as damaged, just as distressed as our brain. And everything that happens in our digestive tract also affects our mental state. The science is there. We know, for example, we know that the vagus nerve plays a major role in creating physiological and psychological balance as an antidote to fight or flight and stress response. What we too often forget, and what is not generally taught to mental health professionals, is that the way the vagus nerve operates is definitely affected by how our digestive system is operating. So, for example, if the microbiome, the bacteria that are in the small intestine, are out of balance, and this is new field, last 10, 15 years, and the bad bacteria multiply and the good bacteria are suppressed, the functioning of the vagus nerve and its capacity to be an antidote to the fear and anger of the fight or flight response are diminished. The vagus nerve's capacity to stimulate the production and effectiveness of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is important for rebuilding brains that have been traumatized, is also diminished. So just that one aspect of digestion is also affecting mood. And then mood, in turn, affects digestion. So the more traumatized, the more anxious, the more stressed out you are, and I'm just talking about the microbiome now, and there are many other aspects of it, the more damaged the microbiome is going to be. So it becomes a vicious cycle. And we can interrupt this cycle by protecting our digestive system, repairing damage that's been done by stress and trauma to the digestive system, and then eating foods that replenish the microbiome and promote efficiency in the digestive system. So it should be fundamental, and everyone who's working with themselves or other people should know about nutrition. Now, one of the things that comes up, and as you mentioned, that this wasn't generally observed or known in the mental health professions is sometimes mental health professionals get very anxious about talking about nutrition. Oh, that's not in my scope of practice. I'm not a nutritionist or a dietitian or a doctor. Call it education. Is it not all right to educate people? Or say, you should read this book or read this chapter in Jim Gordon's book or whatever. Let them, if they sue you for malpractice for that, I'll come and defend you. Right? Because what you're doing is you're giving people basic information that's available. We're not talking about prescribing toxic drugs or doing a surgical procedure. What we're talking about is information that is available to everyone. And I think mental health professionals all should have some basic grounding in nutrition and in mindful eating, and they should be including that as part of their work with everyone they work with. It's certainly part of my work with every person I see.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I was presenting to a group of behavioral health professionals on holistic well-being and a multitude of different practices, nutrition being one, stress management, movement, the gamut. And I had a clinician come up after the presentation and say, "That's nice, but that's for the worried well," which was such an interesting perspective. Because as you said, this is basic information that all human beings need to have access to. It isn't, just for some people who have resources and access. And so I find that to be a very interesting perspective in that world sometimes.
Yeah, and I'm curious. This is for the worried well, meaning what? It's not for him, or her. It's not for their patients or clients.
This person was talking about their patients or clients, that they have severe mental illness and severe needs, that it's not connected, which was really such an interesting perspective.
Well, I don't know whether I would put myself in the worried well or the severely mentally ill class, but it changes me. Mm-hmm. And I've worked with people, severely depressed people and psychotic people, with whom nutrition, as well as very anxious and very traumatized people, for whom nutrition has made a significant difference. Is it a cure-all, a panacea? Occasionally, but mostly no. But it's part of a comprehensive approach. And what people need to do is they need to experiment on themselves. They need to look at the evidence, at the research literature, and they need to begin to think about how to apply that with their patients or clients. But they have to experience it themselves, too. Mm-hmm. That's part of the message that I really want to get across, that whether you're doing psychotherapy with somebody else, you shouldn't be doing it unless you've been in psychotherapy. You should experience, what is this like? Same with using meditation or nutrition. You need to have experimented with yourself to find out what the benefits are, what the challenges, and if there's a downside, what the downside might be. So you'll know and you'll be prepared to deal with somebody else. And we need to be opening up. We invite people who are listening to us to come to our training programs. They can look at our website, cmbm.org. We're training so many people who are working with issues related to substance abuse and trauma and mental health and chronic physical illness here in the United States and all over the world. And so take a look. If you want to learn, how to use this method, we welcome you. And we have online trainings right now, so they're easy to get to. And if for some reason, if you're working with a low-income, marginalized population, or you don't have money yourself, and you want to work with those people, we do our best to find scholarships, at least partial scholarships. We want, the whole point of what we're doing is to make available what we've been learning and using to as many people as possible.
Really,
and the Center for Mind Body Medicine website, cmbm.org, all information is about our programs is there.
That's great. And we'll make sure that gets in the show notes. It's really about embodied practice and how, again, going back to how we started this conversation where you talked about compassionate presence. And so how can I show up my best self as I work with people? my clients, patients, etc. So as we look at that, how does your work support healthcare professionals directly?
Well, the primary focus of our work is on healthcare professionals, although we also train educators, community organizers, clergy, and peer counselors. Still, we've trained about 7,000 people now, and probably at least 80% are health professionals. So that's where we started, and that's where our focus is. And we teach you by inviting you to come to our trainings, experiencing our model, learning the techniques, learning the science, experiencing the small group model. That's the first part of our training, which is sometimes it's 4 days, sometimes it's 5 days. Then in the second part of our training, we teach you how to use what you've learned in the first part with other people. So when you came through the advanced training, you led a group. Mm-hmm. You taught people the science of the techniques you were teaching, you were in charge of the group process, and you got feedback about that. And then what we do is we help people through ongoing supervision and mentorship to integrate what you've learned from our training into what you're doing. So you may decide, well, I want to do one of these mind-body skills groups and use the tools that are there in transforming trauma, and that's what I want to focus on. Or you may say, well, I want to include this in my one-on-one counseling with people, and I want to include some techniques, or I want to develop workshops where I include the techniques. And so our job in that period of mentorship and supervision that follows the training is to help you integrate what you've learned into what you're doing. And what we're teaching is the basic vocabulary and grammar of how human beings function, and tools and techniques so that you learn to speak that language. And it's very easily integrated with every kind of therapy that I've seen, whether it's family therapy, individual therapy, cognitive therapy. People use EMDR together with what we're doing. They use all different kinds of approaches. It's used with harm reduction. People in programs of abstinence can use it. It's a flexible model, and these are tools and techniques that are part of our sort of the heritage as a species, drawn from many different traditions, for which we now have scientific evidence. And so our goal is really to help you to do your work and help you integrate it in a way that makes sense to you.
And I'm curious, do you have any stories or examples of how you've seen this work transform people who have gone through the programs? Any that come to mind?
Well, many, many, many examples. I'm going to give one I love. It's quite dramatic, but people can take a look on our website at a little video which illustrates it. I think I probably showed it to you in the initial training. The one of the little kids in Gaza who had lost. So this is an example, and I hope it's a useful example. We've been working in Gaza as well as in Israel since 2004, 2005. And we've trained about 500 people in Israel in our model and about 1,000 in Gaza. And those 1,000 people have worked with either in small groups or individually or workshops with about 280,000 children and adults over the last 15 years. There's a video that shows a group of 8 children, all of whom lost their fathers in the 2014 war between Hamas and Israel. And there's a little girl in the group named Azar Jendia, and I write about her in Transforming Trauma as well. And in the first group, she does some drawings. We do drawings in the first group. We're always trying to mobilize people's imagination as well as their cognitive capacity. And she drew herself with her biggest problem. And her biggest problem was her father had been killed, 2 uncles had been killed, an aunt had been killed in the war, so she drew their dead bodies with blood. Her home was destroyed. You could see the destroyed home. Her school was destroyed. And she was this little tiny stick figure off in the corner. The next drawing was draw yourself with your problem solved. So often that's a positive drawing because the imagination can imagine a solution. In her case, she drew herself in the grave with her father. And she said, the only solution to my problem is to die, to be killed by Israelis, to die and be in the grave with my father. There's nothing for me in this life. Direct quote. After 9 sessions, learning soft belly breathing, slow deep breathing, shaking and dancing, learning to use mental imagery, working with a genogram, a family tree, working with a written dialogue, she did another set of drawings. And this time when she drew herself, and this particular drawing is not in the 60-minute segment, when she drew herself, she was a big girl, not this little stick figure. She had a smile on her face. She had brown curls, nice skirt on, bright colors. There was an arrow coming from her chest through a heart. In the heart, it said, I love nature. And the arrow was headed toward a tree with all these beautiful blossoms on it. She said, since I've been in this program, I've learned to love nature and love myself. The next drawing was where she would want to be, equivalent to having her problem solved. And she was there in a white coat and had a stethoscope in her ears. And I said, and on the video, it's a CBS 60 Minutes segment, Scott Pelley, the interviewer, says, who are you here? And she says, very proudly, I am a heart doctor. Since the war in Gaza, many people have had their hearts hurt. I want to be there to help them. And then he said, I said, both of us said, and who are these 5 people standing nearby? And she looks at us with this big grin and she says, oh, those are my other patients. They're waiting for me. Now, this is 9 sessions of these self-care skills. The person leading the group, and this is lost in the translation, because she said they translated her Arabic word as doctor, a teacher. It was an ordinary school teacher who led the group. This is very important. Anybody can do this. So that's an example. A girl who wants to die. It's not that she's not sad. She told me, this didn't get in the 60 Minutes segment, she said, these purple socks are ones my father gave me. I wear them so often. So she loved him and she still feels sadness, but she has a new life for herself. That's what's possible. And many of the people I write about in Transforming Trauma have been through that kind of trauma, or even the trauma of gross physical abuse as children, of incest and sexual abuse. And they can come through it using this approach and come out on the other side.
It's a beautiful example. Thank you.
And we have research. I just want to add that.
Yeah.
We've done a whole bunch of studies. Anyone who's interested can see them on the website. You can follow up. And in general, what we've seen is that 80% of the people who qualify for a diagnosis of frank post-traumatic stress disorder, anxious, agitated, withdrawn, flashbacks, nightmares, 80% of people who qualify for the diagnosis at the beginning of an 8, 10, 12-week long group no longer qualify after those 10 or 12 weeks, and those gains hold at follow-up. So this is an intervention that works, not for everybody, but for the vast majority of people, even those who are disabled by their trauma, and works perhaps even more easily with people who, like most of us, who have symptoms of post-traumatic stress but are not disabled.
Thank you. So I'm mindful of the time. As we wrap up, I want to just end with this last question. And how has this work impacted your life?
In a way, this work is my life. This work is I went into medicine to help people. So this is. I mean, I still do acupuncture and I can do musculoskeletal manipulation and do those things, But most of my work is teaching people how to understand and help themselves and use this model with others. For my own life, I hope it's made me more observant, more compassionate to others as well as to myself, more aware of the way I get in my own way and create problems for myself, more flexible, more capable of dealing with adversity as well as helping other people deal with adversity. So this is a kind of widening and extension of the path that I started on when I went to medical school in 1962. This is a continuation. And as I do this, I have a sense of connection with all, as the Lakota people say, with all my relations, with all my ancestors, with all those people all over the world who are doing healing work. So it's also expanded who I am as a person and my sense of comradeship and a familial feeling for people everywhere, all over the world, people who are going through every imaginable kind of challenge and stress and trauma. So I believe it's changed who I am, and I think it's going to keep on changing who I am.
Well, and what I'm struck by is that really all of these practices and this work is a lifelong path and a lifelong practice. And so I think that's just highlighted there.
Thank you. Yes, that's beautiful.
Well, where you mentioned the cmbm.org website, anywhere else that people can find your work that you want to share with us today?
Well, I think that, the most important, the most basic and foundational introduction is my book, Transforming Trauma. The information about all the techniques, all the science, all the stories, all the scripts for the techniques are in there. So people will have a really rich sense of what this work is about, and they can begin to use it themselves. Looking at the website, on the website there are videos of me and other people demonstrating the techniques. There's the research on our work. People can participate in online groups if they're interested in doing that, and they can sign up for the trainings that we're offering regularly here in the United States and around the world. So those are the plan. You can look at the stories. There's been stories in the New York, as you mentioned. Well, you mentioned my writing. We've also been written about in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Atlantic, other USA Today, and other places. So people can look and see what this is and see what interests them that way.
Wonderful.
And they can talk to you, too.
Sure. I'd love for you to. Reach out. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Gordon. We really appreciate your time, and it's just been wonderful chatting with you today. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it as well.
Thank you for listening to CASAT Conversations, your resource for exploring behavioral health topics. We hope you found today's conversation timely and meaningful. Please share this podcast with your friends and colleagues. If you want to learn more, visit us at our blog at CASATOnDemand.org.
CASAT Podcast Network. This podcast has been brought to you by the CASAT Podcast Network, located within the Center for the Application of Substance Abuse Technologies at the University of Nevada, Reno. For more podcasts, information, and resources, visit CASAT.org.